Do it.
Let's do it.
Well, it's approximately 8:16, and I'd like to call the Whatcom Public Utility District #1 meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. So the first thing on the agenda is, of course, our Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So let's go over our agenda. Are there any modifications or changes to the agenda?
The executive session on water rights says not required.
Okay,
So we can strike that.
all right. Any other changes or modifications to the agenda? Okay, then, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as proposed with the elimination of executive session.
I'll make that motion. I'll
There's a
second.
motion. In the second, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now let's move on to the consent agenda. We're approving the minutes of our regular meeting from November 14th and claims for today.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Let's move on to public comment.
None from me. Oh, that's no fun, you too.
That's not quite at all.
Where's the sport in that?
Well, you do it afterwards.
Yes, okay. Yeah, well,
Thank you.
is there anybody attending remotely that would like to make a comment? Okay, there is a public comment at the end of the meeting. So we'll I'll close the public comment period for now. Let's move on to the general manager's report.
Thank you, commissioners. Got a number of things that I want to go over today, a couple of real quick transactional ones. First and this is really good news, our audit has begun. Of course, if you ask Annette, it may not be really good news, but it's supposed to be done by the end of this year. This is our every other year audit that's performed by the state. And we were notified there was nobody local that was going to be working on it. Annette got a note from the auditor who's going to be our lead auditor, and he has about 18 months experience. So it's not certain whether he's ever done an enterprise funded organization, much less a PUD as part of the state audit. But we'll find out. And usually there's a team of 4 or 5, and this would be our leader of the team. So it's they're running fairly thin over there. Second thing is I went to a water storage presentation yesterday that was put on by the county. And as soon as I get the slides from yesterday, I'll forward it out. There was some really interesting stuff in there. So the county had gotten some grant funding and they tasked a consultant, Anchor QEA, with coming up with storage solutions. And what Anchor QEA initially did was they said, well, what we want to do is figure out enough storage to cover the agricultural needs. So kind of take that out of the equation in terms of discussing, stream withdrawals, that kind of thing. That was conceptually what they were going for. And I think they've completely walked away from that. And what they ended up with instead was a whole bunch of different options for storage. So there was physical storage where you just literally, fill a reservoir. There was physical storage where you create a low-level storage pond and then use that seasonally. There was physical storage where you store it in ground, kind of a managed aquifer recharge. And then there was the storage where you reconnect floodplain and wetlands, creating essentially storage. It slows down the flow. So it really, takes the flow from, a day from Mount Baker to the sea to months. So it goes out into these wetlands and then it gradually drains back into the streams. And then the last thing they looked at was introducing beaver dam. It was BDAs. What does the A stand for? Do you remember, John?
No, I didn't catch that. You went through that really quick. Beaver dam
Equivalents. Yeah. So that was either introducing wood structures in the stream to slow the stream down or introducing beavers to the stream. and let them do their thing and slow the stream down. So when you look at the natural solutions, which is the reconnecting the floodplains and the beaver dam equivalents, that ended up being between 5 and 40 CFM, and largely on the South Fork, as I recall. And they said that those estimates were really, really squishy, that there was no real science behind it. When it came to the lowland storage,
If I may,
yeah,
5 and 40 CFM during low flow?
during the summer, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's specifically what they were looking for. I'm sorry, CFM is CFS, cubic feet per second. So they would defend the low end, the 5 CFS, which is kind of rounding error stuff. 40 CFS, when you get upstream on the South Fork, in the main stem of the South Fork, that's significant. So that was kind of real. And it turns out that all the really good beaver habitat is in the South Fork. So that was one other thing that they found when they were doing their survey. The lowland storage, and I don't recall the exact flows, and it was different. There was lowland storage for Bertrand, and then there was lowland storage for the North Fork and the main stem. And the total flow was something like 5 or 6 CFM or CFS, pardon me, for Bertrand, which is real flow in that stream. So that was,
Because it runs dry.
it runs dry. That's right. And so this is this would be a really big deal for that. The problem with it was it was somewhere around $100,000 per acre foot on the storage. So it was one of the by far most expensive options, far and away one of the most expensive options. And the reason for that is pretty apparent. You have a lowland shallow impoundment, and then you move everything around through pumps and pipes. So you've got to build miles of piping, and you've got to build big pumping stations, and you can't take advantage of gravity because it's already down on the flat. So it's that was why it was so expensive. And so it's something that they're looking at. And then the last set of storage options was a variety of high altitude storage. So they looked at Maple Creek was one. I had not seen that one before. Rebecca had seen that. And I don't know, John, if you had seen that one before or not. And that's on the North Fork. And they were looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of, 20 or 30 CFS for that. And then the big North Fork Dam, which we had seen before, and that's just upstream of Nooksack Falls. And that one was about 50,000 acre feet. And there's enormous construction problems with that one. It just
Relocating SR5.
yeah, you gotta Mount Baker Highway has to be moved. It's some enormous problems with that one. And the construction, well, the construction cost estimates went from less than $500 million to $2.5 billion, depending on what you did with the road. It's huge. Yeah. Now, that size, you're talking about a 100+ foot tall dam. So the dam itself is going to be very expensive. If you didn't have to do anything else, that would cost a lot. So it's kind of but they had a unique solution there. So the thing would mimic normal flooding up to about 2 times normal flow. And then it would impound behind that. And then you'd let it impound in the late spring and then let it come out at normal flow levels all through the summer. And they were saying, John, do you remember, it was 100 cubic feet a second in the North Fork? It was really significant.
Yeah, 180 additional 180 cubic feet per second could be used for in-stream or out-of-stream supply.
Yeah.
Cold water.
Cold water, that's right. Set
Relatively
altitude. Cold. Yeah. So that one had very high costs. It was less than 100,000 an acre foot that Bertrand solutions were, but it was still quite expensive. There was one that I had not seen before, Springsteen Lake, and it is up in the South Fork, nearly on the Skagit County line, at about 3,800 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they're looking at 150 inches of combined rain and snow a year at that elevation, at that location. And that one was in the neighborhood of, I can't recall now, 5,000 an acre foot.
6,000.
Yeah, so it was it was one of the cheapest options. The only thing that was less expensive, I believe, was the beaver dams. Because the critters do most of the work for you, so,
How many beavers do we have on staff today?
none, but,
None.
you know, they're looking at hiring hundreds.
And the problem is you have to relocate the family,
Yeah,
it's not just.
because if you relocate individuals, they just move, they migrate back to where they came from. But you do the family groups.
Furs or non-furs beavers?
you know,
Okay.
And you know, the overtime is a real issue because those guys, they work all the time. You know, it's just when they're awake, they're working. Busy as a beaver, as they say. But yeah, it was.
The other thing to point out is they did not look at the federal lands.
Yeah.
Because they foresaw the federal
It would be more difficult to permit.
permit licensing. Would be much more lengthy in time, but it may be, you know, in time, some of them.
And in my opinion, they did a good job at looking at the non-federal high altitude locations, but not an exhaustive job.
Yes. And
So,
they said that.
yeah, so they found, like, I had no idea about the Springsteen Lake project at all. That was news to me. And they've been, and that was some of the feedback that I gave them early on. When we saw earlier versions of this study was, hey, is there more high altitude storage that you can get at? And they were like, no. And then, yes, here's two more. And, presumably there may be some more out there. Springsteen Lake was an enhancement of an existing lake that already exists at altitude, raising it, I don't know, some 30 or 40 feet. The Maple Creek one, there's no impoundment there at all, just a small wetland. So it would be inundating a valley. The issue there is that there are landowners. There are 16 parcels that are either people live on it or they're working in that little valley. So, and this is just downstream of Nooksack Falls is where Maple Creek comes into the North Fork. I'll give you some idea of where it is physically. So, you know, I guess the good news was what? So the next step for this task force is, number one, they daylighted this. In attendance were, of course, us, the county. Both tribes had representatives there from their technical staff. John was there. And it was I think a really good meeting. There was a lot of positive interplay. So now what they're asking this group of experts to do is simply, you know, number one, give feedback on the report itself. Number two, rank the projects. And they've proposed kind of a ranking scheme. And they're asking everybody who is in on the meeting to go ahead and respond. And we have until the 11th. Yeah, I'm going to try and
Of
get
December?
it. Yes, I'm going to try and get it in by next Friday. For
So we
mine.
don't have a commission meeting before that. I'd love to, will it be presented at the Watershed Management Board?
And the last one was, yes, they gave an update. So it'll be presented there as a final. And what you'll see on the ranking is that this is the proposed ranking by all the people who sat through all the meetings. So it's kind
Okay.
of like an expert board. And you know, it'll be take it for what it's worth. And then presumably the county or the WIRA board or both would proceed forward to get some grant funding and just start these projects. And
Does the commission feel like it needs to provide input to that process at all?
Let me add one comment. It was pretty clear as an observer there yesterday. That there's going to be a coalescence around 4 to 5 of these projects that are kind of, you know, whether they're 1 through 4 or 4 through 1, whatever order, there's going to be 4 that rise up based on cost or viability, and then pursue the low hanging fruit after that. I mean, so I don't know that I would just offer, I don't know the commission input.
It's very far from implemented, very far.
yeah,
No,
this
I
is
understand. I'm
still
just asking
conceptual.
the commission a question.
I think if Chris takes the time to provide his feedback, I'm happy deferring to him at this stage in the process.
And where you'll have direct feedback and input on it is at the WIRA One board, because that's where I expect things will actually get sorted out and funded.
Cool. So maybe if we have a little bit of time after the meeting today, I just like to chat briefly about that with you.
That's fine. I would suggest that let me get the information out to you first, so you got a chance to read through
Okay,
it.
sure,
and,
yeah.
You know, we can have a real discussion on it.
Yeah, I don't have, I mean, I think I'm delighted that this is, personally, I'm speaking for myself. I'm delighted that this conversation is proceeding. And it is an area where I'm grateful that the county took some leadership and got this work proceeding. And the only comment I have at this moment is that the South Fork as opposed to North Fork, from what I understand, crises are already happening on in the South Fork. And less so in the North Fork. Is that a correct assessment? And would therefore the projects that are on the South Fork take precedence over projects that are on the North Fork?
Well, I can only answer that personally, not, I mean, really,
Yeah,
the answer would
yeah.
have to come from the Wire One board, but it seems to me that the recent fish kills have been in the South Fork.
Yeah.
And so the temperature deviations seem to be more extreme in the South
Yeah,
Fork.
okay.
And, you know, in terms of the flow events, those seem to be kind of spread around between the main stem and all three tribs, but the temperature excursions seem to come from the South Fork.
But then the other question I have is that are there any of these higher mountain storage projects that have the potential to address this power supply problem? Meaning producing electricity when our demands peak in the winter.
So I had a discussion with the Anchor QEA folks because they've heard that from me before. And, you know, at this point, I'm going to have to walk back what I've said in the past. It's, you know, shame on us if we don't put power on these dams, you know, build another unpowered dam. The fact is that if you have to get a FERC license on these things, it's going to cost you an extra 10 years minimum and allow 5 or 6 more bites at the apple for anybody that doesn't want the project to happen. So I'm kind of, you know, the power problem may be fixed other ways. The water problem can't be fixed other ways, as I see the water problem. So, you know, at this point, I would not recommend adding power to those unless there's a pretty much unanimous coalition around that. The second thing is that the amount of power available at these things, at the Springsteen Lake one, for instance, what you would end up with is about 750 kW over a 4-month period. So it's low head, low flow. It's not really significant. So putting power up there, you wouldn't even be able to heat the distribution line up that runs the power back down.
It would be a relatively small in terms of comparative to supply.
Yeah, now the big one at upstream in Nooksack Falls, the North Fork, the 50,000 acre foot dam, you could get real power out of that. It would be only during the summer flow. You wouldn't get it in the winter, because in the winter you're allowing water. And I can share with you all the details.
Yeah, no, that's
got the
fine.
dam
I'm not
sketched out.
asking for the details.
Yeah, so it would be, yes, you could get real power out of it, but it would be for about a 3-month period every year.
And then you have to think about the return on capital investment. One last thing on the subject of these dams I've mentioned to you, but I want to mention to the commission and the public, and that's that whenever you have pressure and the reduction of pressure from an inlet to an outlet, you have energy there. And of course, one way to exploit that energy is through hydroelectric generation. Another way to exploit that energy is to produce cooling. So it is possible that the thermodynamics of the situation are such that instead of making electricity, you could actually chill the water. So it's something that is not done yet today, but we live in a unique time at this present time where cooling water is actually a beneficial function. So we're many years away from physical implementation. I'd like us to consider pathways for having designs of discharge, water discharge that exploit those thermodynamics to cool water.
So I've got to go back and restudy my thermodynamics, but in closed channel liquid flow, there isn't an analog for a Venturi, which is what I think you're thinking of. And in open channel flow, there is, but then you don't have the discharge rates that you need.
Yeah.
So
I'm talking to somebody at MIT or something.
yeah, so there's, you know, I get what you're saying. I'm not sure how to make that work,
Yeah.
but it's good to pass on.
And maybe we can talk to some professors at our local universities too.
Well, remember, when you're talking about doing that, the normal flow that you want all winter is flood flow. And you only want it to restrict in super overflow
Yeah,
conditions.
yeah, especially
And-
discharge in the summer. Yeah.
Well, so you need two separate discharge systems. And that would greatly increase the cost of the
Yeah,
thing, but it
might
may
be worth
be, it might be worth it.
Might be worth it.
Yeah.
I just want to bring it up.
That's a good suggestion.
I was just gonna add on this report that it is still very conceptual and
Yeah.
high level. I mean, any low level storage was sites were just kind of mapped, not. studied.
Yeah, never talked to any of the landowners.
Look, maybe a
These
high
are-
level topography map was all that was done, so.
And we suggested lots of different routings for the main pipeline that would greatly reduce the costs. And, you know, of course, there's all kinds of other considerations about where you take water out of the river and.
Christian, you wouldn't know any fluid dynamics people at Western. do you?
Not off the top of my head, Charlie Barnhart might. be somebody
Oh, yeah, I'll
to
start
talk
with him.
to.
Yeah, he's absolutely,
Fix-
he loves talking
Yeah.
about things like that. I'll reach out
Yeah.
to Charlie.
Yeah. So at this point, the PUD's role is just to provide feedback and share knowledge and.
And I'm happy to report that the feedback we've provided so far has been incorporated in the
Great,
study. So it's been a really good process.
They did identify that some of the projects would require local management and operation, and that the PUD was a potential entity to do that. But that, you know, again, that's throwing
Hiring
stuff
the
at the door.
hiring, everything from hiring the beavers to
That's
training
right.
the district.
No, we weren't looking into long-term beaver employment. Yeah, that wasn't. But dam management, pipeline management, that's stuff that we could build in our skill set. Okay. So just to let you guys know, we've got the recruiters on board for the AGM. And we're going to be putting out the local announcements for all that to try and get local recruiting. Got a few people that have already expressed interest, so we're getting some activity on that. And I will be talking to the Teamsters about the related issue on December 6th. So just want to let you guys know.
On that issue, it was suggested to me to mention to you that no one yet went through a migration to PERS. And there may be lessons learned from their transition if you haven't already heard this.
So I've gone down this path and ended up getting a couple of different referrals from John's firm for law firms that are
Okay.
expert in this. And finished those discussions last week.
Great.
So it's,
We'll talk more about that later.
yeah, that would be an executive session discussion more than anything. Okay, so now I want to spend the rest of the time talking to you about the PPC letter that I sent out. And so PPC, the proposed settlement was shared with them. They are not part of the settlement group. The settlement group consisted exclusively of the 4 tribes and representatives of the state of Washington and the state of Oregon. So the states of Montana and Idaho were excluded. There were no other tribes included. There were no public power entities included. And they were all
Could
excluded.
you repeat the names of the tribes that were included? Do you remember them?
No, I do not. I can get that for you.
But they are the ones that are on the dam's hydro system.
Yeah, I think it was the Nez Perce, the Yakima.
Okay.
And then there were
Nez
2
Perce is
others.
the main.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know who has the highest population along that reach. I just don't know.
I
I can
could be wrong,
find
but I
out for
think
you
there's
if you
these.
want. So apparently there's been a settlement, a conceptual settlement, and then the government has written a series of commitments in response to that conceptual settlement. None of our representatives were involved in it. I've read in clearing up in other places that DOE insiders have been contacted and they say on conditions of anonymity because they don't want to lose their job. They say that this is simply a path to breaching, that it's a foregone conclusion and that's what this is all about. And there's billions in additional mitigation costs in addition to what we already spend every year. I guess there's some other issues there. One is one of the government commitments is a very large investment in tribal generation. And they're saying 1,000 to 3,000 megawatts of tribal generation. Looking at what PPC said, I would conclude it was solar they were talking about, but I don't know for sure. And that there's going to be an accounting system that includes the tribal power and all other regional power sources to account for replacing the lower Snake River dams should they be breached. And the accounting system is opaque. There's no there. So if what they're saying is that, hey, look, any solar farm that comes online, regardless of what it was built for, counts against this capacity, well, that's just wrong, because these farms that are coming on now are built to serve specific loads, and that's their contracted for. They're not built to replace the Snake River Dam capacity. The second thing is that, you know, a megawatt of solar is not a megawatt of hydro. They're entirely different, and it's not clear what the accounting is. The only thing that is clear is that the only place all the money comes from for this is either the US taxpayer or BPA customers. And most of the mitigation and the purchase of the tribal output power would be on BPA. That's kind of how this whole thing reads. So in a nutshell, if this thing, as it's been described by PPC, goes through, what we would end up with is far less tier 1 power than we've got today at an unknown but far higher price. And all of that is a backdrop to Bonneville asking us to sign a 20-year contract probably sometime next year. So what PPC has asked us is simply to write a letter to the DOE, and I would also write it to Administrator Hairston in charge of BPA. Would not want to blindside them at all. That basically says, look, given the uncertainties around this and the fact that none of our representatives were involved in the negotiations, we really don't want to sign a long-term contract with Bonneville and be on the hook for all of the things that have been negotiated between the parties, of which we were not a party to the negotiations. And I do want to write that letter and sign it, and I'm looking for your approval. But it's as simple as that. It's, you know, we're being asked to enter into long-term contracts. The capacity is unsure. The price becomes very, very problematic. And given that level of uncertainty, we don't want a long-term contract. We want a 5-year contract, and we'll renew at the end if it's still favorable.
Well, Commissioner,
So thanks for sharing this with us. You and I had a little bit of email back and forth, Chris, and I think I'm just gonna share that a little bit. I think because they're calling it the MOU, or like the draft, confidential draft settlement. It's sort of, those terms are being used interchanged, but I'm wondering, it's a little bit hard to be making policy based on a clearing up article that references a confidential MOU that none of us have seen, and then quotes from DOE employees that won't even use their names. I understand why that's happening, but I think that the first thing that I would ask for is just more transparency. And I think I would be comfortable saying that, you know, we don't want to sign long-term contracts, but that might even be a step too far. I think that, you know, what I would like to see is just what is in the settlement, so that it's not just being filtered through Scott Sims angry quotes in a clearing up article. So to me, it's a little hard to know how much of this, you know, without seeing this base document, we don't actually even know what we're commenting on. So, and I guess I would like to understand the timeline for when they'll be daylighting the MOU, so that we can make better choices about the length of our contract. That was my initial reaction based on the very small amount of information that we're all working off of, which is essentially this clearing up article, and Scott Sims' call to action that we write this letter.
Commissioner Arnett.
Yeah, I agree with Christine. I mean, I'm really interested in what is actually in the MOU. I do, you know, I think that it's probably a good idea to reach out to maybe write a letter that says, you know, we're apprehensive about a long-term contract given what we see here, but maybe not start with, hey, we're only going to sign a 5-year contract, because I mean, the reality is we don't know what's contained in the MOU. So that's where I'm at. I think that a letter should be written that we now have, you know, apprehensions about a long-term contract, given what we're seeing.
So let me just kind of respond to that a little bit. The documents were shared with PPC under a confidential agreement with the US government. And the US government is the one that controls when this thing gets daylighted, not PPC. And they're not daylighting it right now. I don't know why. You know, we can reach out to the DOE and ask them to daylight it. I suspect at some point the document's going to be leaked, and that's when it's going to be daylighted. That it's not going to be an official release by anybody. Having said that, what Scott and the entire PPC is responding to is that they are the organization that represents all of the publics in the Northwest in negotiations with Bonneville. Their belief is that the only leverage we've got is this one lever with DOE. And that once that timeline passes, and we're going to be asked to start signing these contracts beginning next year, once that timeline passes, we have zero leverage. And the organization that we have leverage on today is the one that is withholding the disclosure. So, you know, kind of that's the dilemma that we've got. And it may very well be that what we should do is write a letter to DOE saying that, you know, hey, we've got some real concerns about this and we're hesitant to enter into long-term contracts because you're not disclosing the information.
One more thought that I wanted to share, which is that, you know, a few months ago, we spent a lot of time thinking through what I think are some pretty balanced positions related to breaching the lower Snake River dams, considering that we're a coastal community with, you know, almost 2,000 people employed in the fishing industry. And so we made 3 points. I don't have them at the tip of my fingers right now, but I think that those points might also be worth reiterating, which is that, I mean, if we're going to breach the lower Snake River dams, one of the points that we made was that we don't want to see Northwest ratepayers pick up the tab for all of that. We want that's something that if DOE is pushing this forward, they need to have a plan for what. Go ahead.
So to make changes to the Snake River Dam system, as the primary driver is fish. Fish is a treaty issue. Treaty issues are the federal government's responsibility. So it's not even the DOE's stuff. Any settlement associated with the federal court action, the implications on that on the public power sector should be borne by the federal government. Not even by the state, but by the I mean, DOE, Department of Energy, Department of Power.
Department of Energy, the real DOE.
Yeah.
So you are talking about the federal department.
Yes, I am.
Sorry, I misspoke there. Yeah, it should be borne by.
Right. And that was what was in our original points on regarding breaching the lower Snake River dams, was that we didn't want these costs to be borne by Northwest public power ratepayers. Or I don't know, I don't have the exact language, I can pull it up, but I think those points would be worth revisiting in terms of our position on this issue. But I mean, I'm fine sending a letter. I think my primary concern at this point is the lack of transparency and the fact that public power wasn't included at the table in the discussion.
Let me address some of that. Well, so the first thing is that in the federal settlement, there are interveners. And the public park community is an intervener.
That's not true in this case.
I mean, I don't remember which entity it was, APPA, PPC, which one it was, filed court documents in that case.
You're talking about in the case around the BIOP and the bigger flow case for Columbia River. That's correct. This is a separate settlement for that case that was determined by the six parties in the US government. And they're gonna propose this at the settlement
So the
solution.
argument is that and the argument is that they were, the public parking was excluded in that settlement. I understand that one. But certainly the public park community, everybody knows where they stand on this issue. With BBC and other venues. I just want to clarify that. So, what we would be doing, what you're proposing to do would be double down and adopt the position of the public park community. Now, let me talk about two things. One is our organization's history on this subject. We have not weighed in on this, and I've been a key element of us not weighing in on this for 5 years, so I wouldn't expect me to change that without careful thinking. My position has been consistently one position, and that is that the lower Snake River dams are outside of our immediate scope. And it to essentially recognize the position of the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribe, and that they choose, as a matter of practice, to stay out of discussions involving watersheds that are outside of their scope. Even though, of course, just like there's an indirect connection between Snake River dams and public power, there's an indirect connection, similarly, that between Chinook salmon, the Chinook salmon in the Snake River, and of course Chinook salmon that reach our immediate waters. So, for that reason, my position has been to not support getting in the middle of Snake River Dam disputes. And if we are going to do that, it quite likely could damage our relationship with our local tribes. And I've had conversations to that effect, and I don't want that. Secondly, the connection between what the federal government is doing in a private undisclosed settlement and the public park community is, and one second the point that Commissioner Grant made about transparency, that connection is not clear. We don't know what that power supply substitution plan is. I would need to review that. If BPA has access to it, BPA has a responsibility to let us know, as an organization that has to maintain as a federal agency, many transparency, has to let us know what the contract implications are for signing up to a settlement. Whether they exclusively sign up to it or not, they're effectively signing up to a settlement. They're going to assume responsibility for managing the power impacts of that settlement. So for these reasons, it's completely premature for us to that. And if it's we miss a window, we miss a window. I'm not in support of a letter.
I just have a lot more questions, like I said, before we submit a letter. I'm confused too, in the last, we did submit this very balanced position at the end of the last legislative session. Remember when we had all the discussions about the Lower Snake River Dam? Part of what happened at the end of the Washington State legislative session was that they allocated like close to $8 million to study how to replace the energy, transportation, and irrigation functions of the dams. And they're one of the parties to this. They're one of the 6 sovereigns. I guess I haven't had enough time to also make phone calls to other people that might know more about this issue. It sounds like all of us are in the dark, which is part of the issue here. But
and I have requested a PPC to get a copy of this that I can give to you guys, and they've said no at this point. That was just last week. So
thank you for requesting it.
I think some kind of communication to BPA to say, show us a sensitivity, give us a sensitivity analysis essentially. And it's not just we, it's not just Whatcom County who wants it, to all your public fire customers. That lets us know the impact of this settlement on our tier 1, tier 2 rates or contracts. I'd like to know.
I would suspect, not being a BPA administrator, that the response that you would get would be something of the fact that, gosh, it's nice that you're paying attention to that, but until settlement is final, we won't have any idea what impact it has.
Have you talked to Ken Hayes about this?
No, I haven't spoken to Ken about this.
Yeah, I reached out to Nancy Hirsch to talk to her about it and haven't heard back yet. I mean, this is coming, this is new.
It's fresh,
Yeah.
it's fresh, yeah.
So, I mean, Jamie, were you gonna say something? No, okay.
I don't believe we're that influential in this.
I also don't think we're that influential.
Yeah.
Our voice on this matter probably isn't going to make or break it, but I would love more information. I think that's where I'm at on the issue, and
Well,
any form that we can get it.
then let me first write back to PPC and let them know that my commission is reluctant to do anything without full disclosure. And that you guys need to see what it is. And then let me write to Administrator Harrison.
It's on our prior communications.
They already have that. And I also want to send a note off to Administrator Harrison, letting him know that this really introduces a lot of uncertainty in the post 2028 rate setting, and that our commission has asked for kind of a thoughtful analysis of this of the price sensitivity of this issue on BPA rates post 2028. And as I said, I expect we'll get a non-answer, but you never know till you ask.
I think that it's fine if we sort of join the chorus of other public utilities expressing concern about it. It's just, yeah, I don't think we need to say we won't sign a
I would not
contract.
agree with that.
Okay. Well, I
Joining
mean,
the
don't you
chorus
think
can mean, allowing Scott to speak on our behalf on this issue in detail. But I don't want Scott saying that Whatcom County is against.
all I meant by that was like that they know that we are tracking this issue
Yeah, yeah.
and have questions and want answers.
And Scott knows that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can reiterate that to him, that the thing that matters the most here is transparency, and we don't have it.
Right. Yeah.
So I can do that. And then I can communicate to Administrator Hairston that we now have real concerns about the post 2028 rates and how they're going to be structured, and what kind of sensitivity there is for impacts of the proposed settlement. I'm going to assume that Administrator Harrison, as the head of BPA, has seen this.
Mhm.
Might be a bad assumption, but I'm going to make that assumption.
That he's had access to the actual settlement.
Mhm. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised.
well, it would kind of make sense, but I don't know that, because this could have been handled largely with State Department, maybe not even DOE. Because as you point out, it's a treaty issue.
Right.
And I just don't know. Again, it's back to that transparency issue. In fact, I don't even know what I don't know. Okay, I've got a place to start, and I thank you for
Okay,
the guidance.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. Thank you for bringing it up.
You're welcome. And at that point, the defense rests. That's it for the GM report this week.
Okay, well then let's move on to old business. So the first thing on our agenda is the broadband program update.
Hi, Andrew.
Good morning,
I got it.
Chris.
Can I go ahead with the volume 2 response? We'll do that first.
Yes, please. That'd be great.
Okay. And Jamie, I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of this. I just brought paper copies because we wrote it up yesterday. And
Oh, sorry.
I've reviewed. See, and not this letter? We did talk about it.
We did. So by way of from my microphone, by way of background, the volume 2 came out and our deadline to respond is later this week. There've been a couple of public groups. There's the Public Broadband Coalition. And Andrew, who was the other folks that responded?
The Washington State Association of Counties, WASAC.
Thank you. And so we've seen copies of what they're doing, and I think it was the Broadband Action Team that's what WPUDA's comments are based on. We've seen WPUDA's comments. So our response back on volume 2 is basically to say first that the stakeholder comments you've gotten from the other groups we agree with. That's not there isn't any problem there. The second thing is that we really don't think it's a good idea to go into this without project area definitions up front, as they're doing. And so we're citing our objections on that. And then the third and perhaps most important piece is how they're treating areas that have no competitive proposals. So if you could imagine up at Glacier or one of the more remote areas, Deming, if nobody proposed up there, the current way that WSBO would handle it would be they would go to the nearest ISP and begin direct negotiations with them. And we think that's bad public policy, that if you have an area that doesn't get a proposal, a competitive proposal, that you go through another round and you at least attempt to get a competitive proposal that's out in the open. If you go to Comcast or somebody and start negotiating with them, one of the first things they're going to want to do is have you sign an NDA. And then they're going to be, okay, well, we don't want to do the match. That's one thing that's hurting the economics of this project and why you didn't get any bids. And oh, by the way, we don't think that 150 symmetric is the right answer. It's 25.3 for now. And oh, by the way, it's going to be, and so on and so forth. The bad news is all of that's going to be done in private behind closed doors. It won't be a publicly discoverable. Well, I mean, eventually you can discover it, but it won't be till after the contract is signed probably that anybody locally has any input on it at all. And we think that's a very bad answer. And so those are the three things that I wanted to hit on. In rereading volume 2, if you squint and tip your head, you can kind of see a path for public power to be a viable applicant. It depends on how they interpret parts of the operational capacity. If, on the one read, it says, the applicant must, and then it lists it. In the past, we've satisfied that by having a committed ISP that works with us. And we think, depending on how the team that's scoring the thing views that, we think we're okay. So I'm not objecting on the public power is locked out. Although I do think it'll be a little more difficult for public power than it will be for privates. It's just kind of the way the thing is structured.
For example, one of the things that's in the volume 2 proposal is a reference to having a retail ISP, a retail capability, I believe, in the volume 2 proposal from the broadband office, and what we need to have.
So in section 4 of the definitions for an applicant, where they lay out all the different operational capabilities, on the scoring sheet, you're right. That's exactly what it says. But in the detail behind it, there are 3 different things. You can either be an ISP, which means that you filed your form 477 for more than 2 years, or you can be a public power transmission and distribution organization, or you can be a new entrant, well, the new entrant, you need to file your form 477. You need to be an ISP. So the new entrant is just a new ISP.
Obviously gets scored down.
Well, so it depends. And again, it depends on how the people are viewing the scoring. If the whole package is, well, look, they got a committed ISP, and yeah, they're at $75 a month. They're at, 150 symmetric or even gig symmetric, and all this stuff, that's good. On the other hand, if they look at it and say, well, no, they've got subs that do all that, they themselves don't meet these criteria, then you start losing 10, 15, 20 points and you're less competitive. It depends on how they score. And we're not going to know that until they assemble the teams and score. I also think that'll depend on who the replacement is for the director. The director, Vasconi, he went ahead and determined the scoring criteria and oversaw the scoring teams last round. I would expect that same level of involvement next round, and that will depend on who's there. It won't be Mr. Vasconi.
So thank you for this letter. I'd like to open the conversation up for this just in a second.
I can't hear you. Can you speak into the mic? It's just,
Yeah, I'd like to open this conversation up. I was for permission, but I'd like to get a little bit of background. That might help. The first thing is that this is volume 2 is the third, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, request for input from the community on the Washington State Broadband Office's pathway to accept B. There was volume 1, and then there was, I think, a prior iteration too of some high level comments as well.
I think that's correct. Yeah, before we actually saw the NTIA requirements, we gave feedback into WISBO, and I don't think that was well incorporated.
So in the prior 2 rounds of input, it would be fair to say that the input from PUDs like ours who are involved in telecom has largely not been incorporated.
Well, except on volume 1, the thing it largely dealt with was the challenge process. And we did get what we wanted in that, which is the big thing.
Okay. and
So,
that's
that was a
important point.
that was a good win.
And it would also, I would also say that another important exception to what I just said is the allowance for open access. When Mark became the director of the broadband office, he was very down on or unsupportive of open access as a requirement for funding from the previous round of funding. And that's certainly changed over time. So it's just important to clarify that there's a lot of other details in this whole set of comments and what they're proposing to do, which we'll talk to go over today, for the state. And I think you've done a great job, Chris, of identifying kind of the things where we have the potential. So you're trying to be diplomatic and trying to think about what is it the thing that we can actually nudge in a direction that will be beneficial to Whatcom PUD. So this is,
And again, recognizing we're the tail wagging the dog here. We can suggest.
yeah, and it's quite likely that they may not incorporate these.
Well, I think getting, the way that this is going to work is they're going to get the feedback from the large coalitions. And then most of the individual members of the coalition are going to say, and by the way, we support the coalition and here's something that's specific just for our organization. So I think they're going to get a lot of very consistent feedback from public power and the counties.
Commissioners?
So Chris, you and I talked last week. I heard from Councilmember Frazee about the Wassac broadband county feed project preparedness proposal, which is sort of like what NOAANet is offering to do for the PUDs, but this is the Washington State Association of Counties has put a proposal together, and the county council voted or is voting on contributing $25,000.
They did that on last Tuesday.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that I guess I'd like to understand a little bit more about how the broadband steering committee within Whatcom County is kind of approaching policy questions like this. Like, did you guys sort of circle up on this, or has Kayla not been able to engage on this? Because I know staffing on broadband at county is not great, but I just was wondering kind of what that looks like right now.
We went over this
Okay.
at broadband steering committee meeting twice, and Kayla wasn't there either time.
Okay.
And she had conflicting, I get that. There's only one of her.
Yeah.
And I know Gina has been talking a lot with her. I guess in essence, what the county proposal and the WPUDA proposal, excuse me, what they're looking at doing is getting GIS skills and the ability to define project areas, go through all that kind of work, which frankly, Andrew and Gina have already done. So while we think it's a good thing, it just doesn't help us.
Mhm.
So that's why you don't see it addressed here. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder in the future if we should be trying to submit letters like this, like on behalf of the county, the port and the PUD, but
Well,
Yeah,
I think the county association is submitting, whether the county submits anything independently or not, and we're referencing those folks here.
mhm, I see
You know,
that, yeah.
it is, we
Okay.
do support the public stakeholder comments. So, I mean, if
Okay.
Whatcom County wants to respond independent of that, they should.
Mhm.
I mean, that's not for us to say. I don't know, I don't think Gina's responding independently for the port. Do you know, Andrew?
I believe they are going to just utilize the public broadband stakeholder group comments, which would be the NoNet comments.
Got it. Okay. Well, I just wanted to bring it up because, you know, we've done a lot of work to try to get us all coordinated, and I think just that we're sort of stronger when we're working from the same place. And I was a little surprised hearing from Councilmember Frazee that they were doing this work through WhatsApp on broadband too. I don't think it hurts, as you said, but it feels like a little bit of a lack of coordination and a duplication of efforts.
Yeah.
So,
I will tell you, there's a little bit of an insurance policy in this whole thing and the NOAA. If it turns out that in fact, non-ISPs can't bid, then the effort that WASAC is doing and the NOAA
yeah,
would both be conduits for us.
right.
Now, granted, the way this would work is we would contact them and say, look, we're locked out. Can you do this on our behalf?
Yeah.
And then we can help them. But at the end of the day, it'll be them doing it,
Okay.
and they'll own the assets, and we will be advisors in that
Okay.
case. But that's the insurance policy that's out there. So it's not a bad thing. It's just,
Mhm.
I love the optimism. It must be the holiday season that you're being so optimistic about this. And yes, I think you're right. I mean, I think that we're lucky that we've done our homework as an organization. We're lucky that we've been able to do things, and we're lucky that we have known that can do an aggregate application, which the state broadband office has, by the way, told NOAA. And if they told NOAA, mean they would similarly entertain a group application from other entities as well. It's fair to say with Mark Vasconi, I think I just want to repeat again, I want to make sure we all know that he's retiring at the end of this year. It will be relatively more difficult to create changes in the state's policy after he's retired, because the interim won't be in a position to do much. So there is a desire to explore legislative engagement on this subject. Several PUDs that are keeping their key legislators, for example, now Senator Hansen, right?
Yeah.
And looks like the lead on this policy issue will be the Senate. So obviously our senator relating to Whatcom, we have two, of course, Liz Lovelock and Sharon Schumate. If and when we have interactions with them, it wouldn't hurt for us to make them aware of where we are with broadband. Maybe at the upcoming legislative reception in Olympia, which will be in New Year, January. Assuming there's no other pressing version issue, we should make sure they're aware of where things are for Whatcom County.
I think let's get this letter in and hope for the best. And yeah, I agree that this won't be the end of the work. So
Has no one communicated a kind of a follow-up to their initial proposal?
other than
I mean,
they
there's some clause in two,
they pinged Andrew and I yesterday, I think, asking if we wanted to essentially buy into the coalition. And I'm not in a position to say yes or no at this point.
Yeah.
If we were locked out, I could make a value proposition for joining.
Yeah.
If we're not locked out, I can't make a value proposition for joining. So it's kind of a, until we know more, I'm kind of stuck on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much they need a commitment from us.
I think they're looking for money at this point.
Yeah, well, I think that the fact of the matter is that, there's lots of PUDs who need them.
They need the help, yeah.
And we're just not in that position, and if we need them, then we want to make sure we do that door open. So is there anything that, in regards to that, do we feel like the door is open if we need it?
Well, I think it is, but I can also reach back out to them and say, if not now, can we come in later?
Mhm.
And then if they give us a yes or no, I can bring that back to you next
Yeah,
time.
I mean, the point is, depending on the actions of the project.
Yeah, that's kind of, well, I mean, if they say, look, we're building the team now, and if you're not in now, we're not going to build capacity for you.
Yeah,
Uh,
then that should come back to the commission.
Right. So let me ping them on that and find out what the deal is.
And I think before we make any sort of a decision on that, we should talk to Kayla more about this WASAC proposal.
Yeah.
Because it seems strange for Whatcom County to be involved pursuing, I think maybe we
Well,
want
what's-
to pick a path, but I don't know that for sure. I just would want to know more about what their plans
I'm
are.
not, I would say, at this point, keep the options open.
Right.
And that we could
Okay.
have two paths and, at the time we need to choose, we can choose which one.
I mean, who would WASAC hire anyway?
Probably knowing that.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, well, we
So
should,
it may be, what I was wondering when you first said that.
It'll-
and I remember
it
seeing
may
that on the
converge,
agenda a
yeah.
few weeks ago.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know, that's what I was wondering, is it the same thing?
Well, what they're looking for is essentially super regional projects.
Yeah.
So they'd be looking at the Swiss
Yeah.
County projects and submitting that as all one bundle. That may be a good thing, especially if we're locked out and they're willing to do that. Then they could essentially bid for all the unserved locations in Whatcom County, Skagit County, Island County.
Thank you.
All right, so
Chris,
Jamie,
can
I'm
you
sorry.
send a copy of that?
Absolutely. I'll get it to you right after this meeting. And I got to get it on letterhead and get it out, so I'll make sure you get a copy. Thank you very much. Were there any more questions on our volume 2 response? Okay. Andrew, do you have any other updates for us on broadband?
Just one, and then I have another shift gears to geothermal after this.
Perfect.
So for Point Roberts broadband project, just wanted to give you an update. You might know the next step in the project phase is to hire an engineering design firm to develop construction level design sets so that we can go out to bid for construction and get this thing built. So we had the RFQ, request for qualifications, open for a month, and we received 6 engineering firms who have responded to our RFQ. So that's exciting to have so much interest in this work. So we'll spend the next few weeks evaluating and scoring those proposals, and we'll come back to you with a agreed upon contract that we'll seek commission approval for. So that'll be at the end of the year. So we'll queue that up first part of 2024.
So Andrew has put together a scoring committee for this, and the scoring committee is himself, myself, Rob Fix, Gina Stark, and Kayla. So the broadband steering team is the evaluation.
That'll
group.
make the meetings easy.
Okay.
Well, maybe another reason.
Well, that could be. Well, it'll make them entertaining, that's for sure. I'm
Yes.
sorry, Andrew, go ahead. You
No,
were gonna talk
thanks.
about
Thanks. That's
geothermal.
important to note. So thanks in advance, Chris, for your help, and Rob, if you're listening, and Gina. Okay, switching gears to geothermal, we did learn about a Department of Commerce grant that is available. It's the Clean Energy Research Development and Demonstration Grant, or the RD&D grant. And so this would be for the purpose, and Chris, chime in anytime here, would be for a feasibility study to essentially understand the characteristics of the source there out on the southeast end of Mount Baker, where we had previously, we've been talking about the geothermal leasing in that area. So under the grant, it's due December 5th, but it's just a narrative to explain your project, what you want to do. And they'll look at all these project proposals and evaluate whether it's an eligible project, and we'll get informed as to whether we can proceed to phase 2 of the application, which will be the actual application. So it's the kind of the nuts and bolts of the grant is there are $150,000 to $2 million projects available. And the period of performance is to complete the work, if you're awarded, is September of 2024 through September of 2026. And there is a match responsibility to this as well, which is a 1 to 4. So for every dollar match for every $4 that we receive from Commerce. So that's what we'll be working on. Staff will be working on for this coming week, and get our project narrative in by the December 5th deadline. And then in a few weeks, I can't recall off the top of my head when they expect to review all of these phase 1 proposals, but we'll be able to tell you at that point what we hear back and whether we have a go-ahead project to submit for the phase 2 application.
So reading through the RD&D grant, a study isn't exactly a great
It's a
fit,
library.
but the technology that we're studying is a great fit. And Commissioner Grant got us hooked up with some folks in Commerce, and they were really excited about it, and kind of gave us some guidance on how to approach the submission. Now, the people we were talking to had no connection with the people evaluating the project. So, it was fair game. This gal could give us advice, and she did. So I'm encouraged, but it's not a perfect fit. We're going to continue doing this. We're going to throw everything at the wall, and something will stick. And when it does, then we'll have to figure out the match. I would suggest that at that point we approach EDI and at the county, and really talk about the economic development implications of having a large power source inside Whatcom County. So I think that's a big deal. It's going to drive a lot of business. So I'm sorry, Andrew, I just pirated your
Please do. That I was finished.
okay. And that's it for geothermal then.
Great. Did they move back that filing deadline?
No,
It
it's
appears
December
so.
5th.
I think it was in November originally.
Oh, okay.
November 30th, I believe, and then they extended it to December 5th, or in that range. But I think you're right. I did see that there appears to have been an extension at some point, but all we've known since hearing about it is December 5th.
Any more on geothermal?
I guess the only thing I would bring up is, we have not heard back from the Nooks. I don't know if there's a partnership element to that, but, possible interest in the Northwest Indian College being a partner on some of this geothermal work.
That's a great idea.
Is that a helpful connection for me to make, or do you want to make it?
Commissioner Grant, that is a great idea.
Okay.
Well, at this point, I think you could make the
Okay.
connection anytime.
Okay.
It's until we find out, we get to the phase 2, because
Yeah.
then they're going to want to know, okay, who are your partners and what's your
Okay,
process
okay.
and
So
all
we
that.
don't need- There's not.
It's not a time critical thing at all.
Okay,
and-
but I think I'll begin in the conversation. I just won't say I need to talk to you in the next.
See, it would be much harder to get at some, I mean, I think this would be, it's still a pipe dream of an idea, but to get letters of support from the tribes at this particular time. It might be easier whenever, it might be happen sooner to get a letter of support from an instructor at the Northwest Indian College.
And they have a department that's focused
Yeah.
on energy, so I
Renewables
think
and-
there's a good nexus there. So, okay, well, great.
Yeah, and we were actually talking about perhaps asking them to broaden out their major, because they don't have geology classes, they don't have, geotechnical engineering.
Yeah.
Don't know if they have mechanical engineering, which would be really useful. There's some things that would really help everybody if they had the capacity. And if this is the thing that causes that capacity to be built, it's a win-win-win.
Yeah.
Chris, I wanted to follow up on something that Atul had asked about at the last meeting, and that was you drawing up some sort of letter or note about why geothermal in Whatcom County, realizing that was a commissioner-led decision, but just sort of something that we can share with the public. As we talk about geothermal more, I get more and more questions from people about what we're doing and why geothermal, and a lot of concern over seismic activity, and so just sort of high level addressing like why we've arrived at geothermal, and maybe some some information about earthquakes, or about the type of geothermal that we're following up with.
Yeah, I have it about half written, and you just gotta apologize. Right after when I finished the half and I went home that night, the next morning was when the PPC item hit and kind of everything started to roll. So it's been about 9 days since I've touched it, but I've got it about halfway done.
I also just wanted to say, related to that, I reached out to Lauren Lemons and Ellen Murphy, kind of to ask about the Whatcom County Climate Action Plan that was done in 2021. And kind of just looking at existing, because there's been so many reports done on different aspects of climate action and response in Whatcom County. And essentially, right now the current plan doesn't say anything about geothermal. But they basically just said that the reason for that was because they didn't have a local expert last time to research and write up a page on geothermal, and a lot of that the climate action plan was volunteers. Lauren hadn't even been hired yet by the county, and they'll be doing an update to that report. They update it every 5 years, so they're going to start working on it. The next one needs to come out by 2026. And Lauren just said, that essentially having more information, basically us continuing to evaluate geothermal viability will be helpful in advance of the climate action plan update, so there is more expansive set of strategies that reflect technological and market changes. So and we heard that from Commerce too. The 2021 state energy strategy doesn't even mention geothermal once, but when you talk to Commerce, they say
They get excited.
this is something we really want to do. So I think it's a reflection of how quickly technology is changing too in some of these spaces.
Sure. And just for the public's interest, I just want to mention again that Commissioner Grant and Chris did a great presentation at the last Climate Impacts Advisory Committee, which is available now, isn't it?
I think, are those recordings?
I think they are recording it now. So,
Okay.
Anyway, I was able to attend that before I had to head out, but it was a good presentation covering the bases, and I think we're making very clear, and is in lieu of the letter, and we need the letter, as you and I have suggested, Commissioner Arnett, that we're exploring this. I think one important member of our community said he's positioned against it already. And I think the Mike statement to people would be, there's nothing to be against yet.
No.
We'll let you know when it's time to be against it. But we're not for or against anything except exploring the potential. But that's the stage we're in. And it's very worthwhile to explore. We would be not entirely responsible to not be exploring every important opportunity for power supply. If we learned anything out of our study on municipalization, is that we really need to think about power supply. And we don't need even that. The whole public power community would tell us
to be thinking about power.
Hey guys, are you thinking about supply? We all need to be thinking about supply. So, and that's all we're doing and investigating what the implications of supply are.
You're going to talk about the December 5th meeting in your update?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we have anything else right now on geothermal then.
So should we move on to the board retreat discussion?
Just a adjudication update. for John.
Adjudication.
Oh, sorry, I'm missed that.
It's okay. Not a lot to report, continuing my regular meetings or conversations with tribal council, working on some possible rules outlines. For that, have had some contact from the state administration courts. They're working through that to have a commissioner position created, and then eventually someone, a local attorney appointed to be the commissioner that's focused on tasks on water adjudication. That'll be some months before that happens. I am doing a presentation at the small fruit potato farmers conference tomorrow in Linden. About 30-40 minutes. It'll be similar to what I did at the American Water Resources. It'll be about settlement and the commonalities of trying to bring a diverse group of folks together to an agreement like a sports settlement, collective bargaining settlement, and then talking about a little bit about the adjudication process and what we see coming. I'm already hearing things that reported in the community that, boy, if you have an exempt well, save 750 gallons per day of what your consumption is, regardless of what you're really doing. I'm gonna try to debunk that position. It'll just lengthen the process. It's just people the challenge.
No, I'm really happy you're doing that. And I'm sorry to not include you in the agenda there for a second. And if you put on a jacket and a tie for nothing otherwise.
That's okay. Henry Verlin asked me.
That's wonderful. Any further discussions on the adjudication update? I'll mention some things on my commissioner comments on water, but that memo isn't open yet, so I'll wait till do it. So should we move on to the board retreat discussion? So Chris sent us some potential consultants for us to consider. So let's talk about that.
And it sounds like Chris shared a third option with all of you. I got a recommendation from somebody that I really trust that works in the public sector for Clarity Consulting, Katie Johnston, who is the mayor of Centralia. They have a city manager set up there though, so she has another job too. And two things I liked about her, other than getting a personal recommendation, is that she is an elected official. So she absolutely understands some of the constraints that, we wouldn't have to explain like quorum rules to her or something like that, so she gets all of that. And none of these consultants are, subject matter experts necessarily, but Centralia, energy transition has been front and center policy issue. Jamie, I'm not sure if you're aware, but they're taking a coal power plant down in Centralia right now and kind of working on figuring out what's like the next step for a clean energy economy. And I actually found her campaign website and, talking about, what's next for clean energy in Centralia has been a big part of her campaign. So she seemed interesting I don't know if she has availability, but I feel like of the different consultants we've kind of looked at, she felt like somebody that could really come in and hit the ground running in terms of helping our organization. And the other ones looked fine too, to me.
Well, I was not able to view anything on evolution management.
Okay, I had actually yeah.
Yeah,
Did their website keep blocking you?
Yes, and I dug a little deeper. I mean, it looks like it says that they're temporarily closed, and I would not consider them for this, because I wouldn't even know how to contact them at this point. It looks like they're closed. The Klein Consulting looks super promising though. So yeah, one of those.
And of the two I found, that's what I would recommend.
So maybe we should follow up with the Klein and if we wanna-
Clarity
and find out if Clarity is available. And I think is it fair to say, I don't want to speak for the commission at all, are we flexible on timing? I mean,
Yeah, I'm
obviously it's
fairly
not happening this
flexible,
year.
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we can work with a consultant schedule too, so. I mean, as long as it's not pushing it out a year, if it's a month or so, it'd be fine.
Yeah, I
So-
think I'd rather do it in the winter. It does feel like once we get into the summer months.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
These schedules get so crazy.
Well, I doubt that any of these people would have bandwidth until January anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I think do we want to talk about, or I know we've kind of done this before too, but I mean, sort of facilitate, kind of, as far as their in-person, the in-person needs would at this point, I think, be 1 day up in Whatcom County. So if Clarity is based in Centralia and they come up here, we could do a lot of the prep work, which would mostly be with you, Chris,
Mhm.
just over the phone or Zoom, and then it'd just be 1 day
Yeah.
on site with us,
Could-
right?
Well,
Could
so
we do this then? Sorry, go
can I
ahead.
make a suggestion, just an administrative suggestion?
Yeah.
Because it'll simplify things. I would suggest that the three of you designate one of you to interview both of these.
That's exactly what I.
And then
would
go
say.
ahead
Yeah.
and, tell me who it is. And then we'll use our normal procurement processes to issue a contract and get them scheduled and get all that stuff working.
Okay.
And then we'll schedule a retreat and we'll figure it out.
So Commissioner Grant, do you want to reach out to the Clarity, and Commissioner Arnett, do you want to reach out to Klein? Would
Well,
that work?
I would suggest one person should do both, so you get that side-by-side comparison.
Oh.
And you can say that, yeah, this is, I've talked to both, this is the better choice and here's why, and they can articulate that.
I'd be fine with that, yeah. I mean, I could do it, right? And who wants to do it?
I can do it, or who,
I have limited capacity in the month of December, so I could do it, but it would be January before I could really set aside some time for that.
So, is a commission fine? I mean, our December meeting, we have one December. meeting. It's short.
Well, we have two. We have to have the second meeting just to do checks and
Okay,
vouchers, so that
alright.
should be a 10-minute Zoom meeting.
Right. So at our December meeting, I'd be glad to do it too, but I mean, I don't know what you're, I've got time. So,
Okay.
yeah, I'd love to do it. Then I'll do it, and I'll write notes, and being an engineer, I'll make a table of notes. Anyway, so then in our meeting December, then we can decide, we can pick. I don't want to make that decision for the commission, so we can pick. And then Chris can take that ball and run with it. Does that make sense?
that sounds great, if you're up for it, yeah.
And I will go back again, and I did a review briefly, but I'll go back again, listen to our meeting where we had a long discussion about our.
Yeah.
Do you remember that one? It wasn't our last meeting. Maybe it wasn't even the one before that. I have to figure out which one that was. But I think it was our October meeting. It was one of our 2 October meetings.
Yeah, we came
Oh,
up with priorities.
Luckily, and does good
Yeah.
minutes that I'll be able to find that. So one of our 2 October meetings.
Okay, great. So between we'll do Klein and Clarity and pick between one of them.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Chris, for helping, and thanks everyone for their contributions. This ball is moving. Okay, any more on the board retreat discussion? Okay, let's move on to new business.
The first item we've got is the second draft of the budget. Annette, you want to take it away?
It's the next favorite day of the year.
Oh, she's not even unmuting. This is not good.
Don't be shy of that.
Here she comes.
Sorry about that. I always have to remember I have to unmute and all that before I start my slideshow, or the buttons all disappear. So I am going to share my screen and get my glasses on. All right. So we are to the final draft of our budget, and just a quick review for people who have missed the previous parts or perhaps fallen asleep, which is legitimate. And so in October, we presented the draft budget, and then kind of kept it open for some comments from anybody who would like to comment. And then we scheduled some customer meetings, and actually out of the customer meetings, we didn't get any kind of comments. Chris and I got a comment from a Commissioner Deshmani. It was more analysis as opposed to content of the budget, and considering electric issues and then the Grandview issue on that. And so this is the revised budget, and what it basically does is it incorporates the October actuals, so you will see some adjustment there. And then there was some other additions, and what I'll do is it's pretty close to what you saw in the draft, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and just highlight where the changes are and talk about what happened there. And so again, I'll present a slide, and then if you have any questions on that slide, please ask at that time. That'd be great. So just to start off with, before we dive into numbers, this is a picture of our 24-inch line going down Alder Grove, and they're working on installing an isolation valve there.
I will have to follow up with a question, Chris, about that at a later time, because it's a really interesting picture to me. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, so like I said, it's pretty much a lot of the same information you saw in the previous presentation. And then now on our website, that draft budget has been replaced with our final budget. So anybody who's curious about lots of numbers and lots of work, you can go to that link and see that. All right, just starting off with all the operating stuff. You can see I've added what the draft presentation numbers were down below. So you can see the 2023 projected total did drop a little bit. And then the 2024 did increase. And the bulk of that increase happened in industrial water. And the bulk of that increase was up under extraordinary maintenance. Now I have a slide farther down that'll detail out, and I'll show you what that increase was. But it wasn't, there hasn't been a ton of movement. Overall, the budget for 2024 increased roughly just under 190,000. And that's basically that a project that was added in the extraordinary maintenance. And again, just a reminder on all these slides, or most of these slides, you'll see a section reference down in the lower left. And that's the section in our budget where you can get a little bit more information there. Operating costs, this goes into a little bit more detail. The business projects, the business services, and the outside services haven't moved at all. The 2023 amounts perhaps have moved in the outside services, but as far as the 2024 budget, they have not. Up under admin, that has decreased a little bit due to the dues and subscriptions we had talked about previously, removing some of those. And then some up under the office, that decreased a little bit. There. For personnel, this overall has increased 19,000 from what you saw in the draft. And what the bulk of that is we switched up down below on the new positions. The project manager, we had roughly 6 months. That was decreased to 3 months. But the AGM replacement has increased to 6 months instead of 3 months. So that resulted overall in a little bit of an increase there. Now, just as a reminder, this does include the COLA, the cost of living adjustment of 4.6%, a pension contribution to the non-union people of roughly 9.4%. And then commission, we just got, I assume you probably saw it. If not, I'll let you know. They just finally did announce the official announcement for the commission increase. That's released every 5 years by the Office of Financial Management. We have in here 27% because that was what they were projecting it would be. And then the official number came in at 26.16%. So we were right there on that.
And for those that are kind of listening in on this, that covers, I think, a 5-year period. Isn't that correct? In that it's not a 1 year. It's these rates are only adjusted once in a great while.
Correct. Now, the capital budget, this is where we saw the most change from our draft. And so I'll go over a couple There is D station is getting more, we've had that on the list for a little bit, but it's getting more activity and more focus right now. This is the station out that serves BP. And there's some work to be done. And now what happened is the overall dollar amount in 24 and 25 did not increase at all, but we did move more money into the 24 budget. We thought the timing on that was just not quite right. And then the second highlighted one, RW48 high head intake pump purchases, high head and intake pump purchases. We did get a vibration analysis done to see on some of these pumps, and we are going to need to replace some pumps. We had some in there, but we did increase that, so that increased. And then E22, the gift that keeps on giving. Working on the Ferndale sub. We had originally thought last year at this time that we would be done first quarter in 23. Right now they are doing testing on that substation for all the new equipment there. And so we think it is going to probably bleed into the first little bit of 2024. So we adjusted that. So the extraordinary maintenance, this is the one I had referenced on that first operating expenses. We did on the RWM7 more D-station reliability upgrades. That $250,000 was moved from 2025 into 2024. So that resulted in that increase there. Now the long-term debt, I did increase the 2025 issue by 500,000, and that helped. Excuse me. That did help relieve a little bit of pressure on the industrial rates. But we are going to be issuing some debt. That 2025 bond issue, timing on that is, it's going to a lot depend on how we start spending money and as soon as we spending. So we could, if we really get after it and everything's going smooth, we could be actually issuing that at the end of 24. Most likely it'll be towards the beginning of 2025. And then of course that 2027 issue is the one that's a little, I'll call fuzzy. It's just going to depend on some decisions that are made on water treatment plant 1 and then also on the timing. So that 70 could be adjusted and the timing on that also could be adjusted just to reflect whatever the building schedule is on that project.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
I could ask this later too, so if you want to answer it later, please do so. If we were to imagine what our deadlines are, and I'm looking at Chris when I'm asking this question too, for important decisions on plant 1 as it relates to our budget, what do we need to decide now? And what are those decisions that's implicit in this document?
So the decisions that need to be made right now are to go ahead with the utilidor, and that's reflected in here. The decision on what to do long-term with plant 1, ideally, if we will have a good value engineering approach to the whole thing by budget time next year. And, that may be that, we've gotten to the point where here are the 2 options. Here's the one we're recommending, or there may be 3 options or 5 options, but here's what we're recommending and why. And we have that discussion. And it may very well be that there's a gap year before you actually start doing anything. So you value engineer the thing, get your plan together, but then you've got to engineer it and get construction drawings and bid and all that. So there may be, the 2025 spend on this may be relatively low compared to what we had forecast, and it'd be the 26-27 spend that's higher. And it's also possible that, one of the recommendations coming back is that no, we should piecemeal this and just, recognize that we're going to be spending a lot of capital gradually renovating this old plant. And it will end up with something that's suboptimal, but it's better than $100 million replacement. What we're going for now is how can we replace this with a new facility that'll last another 50 years? What would that look like? And what's the least expensive way to do it?
Good. I'm looking at our
Right.
gallery, and I think we're going to get some nice public comments. So I'm excited about that. Thank you for that clarification. And obviously, if it's going to show up in our next year's budget, it'll be certainly essential for the commission to have some qualitative conversations with staff on what is our philosophy about all of this.
So one thing that is kind of new information, and it's not fully baked yet, we've had a couple of meetings with AltaGas, and they are part of the winning Hydrogen Hub Coalition. And in talking to them, they need a lot of power because they're looking at a large electrolyzer installation, but they also need quite a bit of water. And when I say quite a bit, a couple million gallons a day. So it's really pretty significant,
Bigger than we thought.
bigger than we thought. And
So it's for hydrogen plus cooling? Is that what?
yes,
Okay.
exactly. And so, you know, and then they'll have some potable needs because they're going to have some plant installation where they've got people working. And but the what I'm getting at is that it seems like long term we're going to need the extra capacity, and that was a big question in my mind. Was, you know, if you develop nothing out in Cherry Point, and you eventually shut the refineries down, well, we don't need 20 million gallons a day capacity. And but now it looks like we're actually going to get something out there. So I'm kind of leaning more towards, okay, it's not take this thing offline and figure out what to do. It's, you know, do we piecemeal it, or do we do a bulk replacement? Seems to me we're going to get some viable customers out there, and that's, I think, good news.
Thank you. Annette, I apologize. I took us a little bit off the topic, so I hope I haven't caused a problem there, but please continue.
No, and as far as your question is what is built into this project or into this budget, to repeat what Chris said, we focus on the next year, and that's what we know is pretty solid. But then on our capital project, we do go out at least 5 years, and actually the budget goes out farther than that. But I took a conservative approach so that overall it's going to, in the budget's about 127 million, which was one of the higher numbers we heard. It wasn't the highest, but it was one of the higher. But we're trying to communicate that is kind of fuzzy. There's no hard decisions on that part yet. So, but I wanted to put it out there. This potentially could be what it looks like.
Thank you.
All right, in our reserves, this hasn't moved at all. We're still recommending that emergency reserve be increased 5,000, which again, we recognize as small. It's probably too small, but in light of what the rates are looking like, we decided to keep it a little smaller than we probably should, but we are slowly increasing that. All right, debt service coverage. You might have heard this a little bit, and when we issue bonds, you will hear it a lot more. This is, and per our internal financial policy, our goal is to target our budgets to hit 1.5. And what that means is once you bring your revenue in, you take out all your cash expenses, so you ignore depreciation, amortization, things like that. How many times do you cover your debt service that you have for that year? And so again, we budget towards 1.5. You'll see in 2027 that dips, and that's because right now it's got that $70 million issue. Right now I'm keeping that at that, just because I think that the schedule and the spending schedule on that is a little fuzzy. If we match exactly what all the spending would be, then we would be having some more increases in 2027 there. So our strategic plan slide, this hasn't changed since our draft. We are still spending roughly $850,000 of customer revenue towards projects, the bulk of that being in the adjudication for the year. And we're right now projected to spend roughly 2.8 million in grant funding, and the bulk of that being the Point Roberts fiber project. All right, a break from, excuse me?
I have a quick comment on the adjudication funding. Of that, the big portion are the legal fees and the studies that we're doing, right?
Correct. That's substantially all of it. No other substantive work being done, and then any material work.
And just on the grants, we do have the geothermal study in there, and we're assuming a 25,000 match that we have to come up with somewhere. So we've got it in our base budget, and So it's in there.
And the rest of it that's listed is through grant funding.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so this is actually an older picture, but it is a picture of our refinery sub, just to kind of give you an idea of what some of our infrastructure looks like, our electricians working on there. All right, now the uglier slide. So industrial water rates. With that additional funding and some other things, I was able to get that down to roughly 12%. In our draft presentation, it was closer to 14%. So that did come down a little bit, but we do issue more debt. That's kind of the trade-off you do in some of these things. So you can see up above, depending on where you're weighted on the customers, if you have more of the fixed capital, more of the fixed operating, more consumption, your individual increases do vary a bit. It's not an across the board increase. And so that's our industrial.
So any comments from the commission on that? I have one, and that's, we did a cost of service analysis and it made certain recommendations. Do we produce a document explaining why, our actual budget does not conform to the cost of service assessment? Or how it conforms?
Well, okay, a couple things on that. Number one is we do have the final report. I have not had time, I've been focusing on this to actually go through and review it all. But you will be seeing that really short. Number two, when they developed that cost of service analysis, they were working off of last year's numbers. So you have to take that into account a little bit. They did recommend a higher increase in the industrial water rates than we are showing here. You know, my goals are to make sure that we get above our minimum cash, so that we cover all our expenses, and then that debt service coverage is another thing. And then to not necessarily build reserves, but to smooth increases and decreases as I look forward. So those are kind of the guiding principles on that.
So I just maybe want to mention this in a slightly different way. I'm thinking about this from kind of a quality system. And Chris, I think you know what I mean when I say that. So you go outside, you get analysis. And then it's obviously we have to do what's right for our customers. But we still, I think, carry a little bit of responsibility to explain why we're taking a slightly different approach.
Yeah. I think the best way for me to get that information, I know exactly what you're getting at.
Okay, great,
And-
thank you.
And I think the best way to get at that would be, we'll make a final presentation on the COSA itself and have a reconciliation on that versus the budget. And I will tell you, there's like 15 different ways to allocate costs and that are fine. All of these are acceptable ways to do it. And FCS advocated one way for Grandview, and Annette and I looked at it and we said, you know, I understand from a pure accounting point of view, I get that. We're not going to make that choice, and we're going to make a different allocation choice that lowers the costs in Grandview. I think that the best place to present that would be with the COSA and simply do a reconciliation. And, you know, this is what FCS recommended. Here's what we did and why, and here's the result.
And that will be a document in our records, basically.
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
thinking about the audit too,
Yeah.
obviously.
I'm just not sure if we can, with the audit, I'm not sure if we can get the the COSA reconciliation to you. I'm sorry, I'm speaking code, cost of service analysis, COSA. We can't get the COSA to you probably until January.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to, here's the capacity is, I don't need to prove anything. I don't believe I need to prove anything in that capacity besides the budget, but I'm just trying to share some thoughts about how we might better cover our tracks in terms of explaining why we went from this to this. So
Yeah.
Explaining, being transparent.
Sorry. Annette.
Okay, and just FYI, the auditors don't care about the COSA. They really don't. So they just want to make
okay.
sure.
Yeah, they really don't care.
They won't.
But it is, you're right, because we use the COSA to make determinations on how to allocate costs, and it helps guide that.
But it will be something we would show on the government accountability side of the audit rather than financial side to show transparency. So it doesn't really show up on the financial accountability side, which is what I think you're drilling at.
Yeah.
But it is a record that shows transparency, which aids the government accountability side.
Mhm. Okay,
All right. The Grandview, this is the one that we knew was not gonna be nearly as pretty. I was able to, in their original draft, it was at 36%. I was able to decrease that a little bit. And that is as a result of what Chris talked about and playing with those allocation numbers a little bit. And then also like I said, one of the things that we look at is making sure that our cash is above our reserves. And in the Grandview system, the capital reserve was fine, but the operating reserve was really challenged. So what I did, and we decided, was to combine those. So I was able to decrease this a little bit, just combining those reserves. So in combination of the operating and the capital, the ending result of cash is above the combined reserve minimums. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's kind of what played into that Grandview rate being able to be decreased there. And then the electric rates, that's the happy one of the year.
Could I ask a quick question, Annette? So, with Grandview, didn't Healthy Pet, close its doors at Grandview? They're not operating at Grandview anymore?
Go back into the sales.
Yeah.
Part of this is reflected.
Okay. Is that gonna have any impact on our rates at Grandview or?
Oh,
This
yes.
is,
This
yeah.
is the, okay,
yeah,
okay,
that's one of the reasons why it goes up so much.
okay, all right.
And
Yeah,
then
that is-
electric,
It's bad news, yeah.
Yeah,
but before, while we're still on Grandview, I guess, Commissioner Arnett, this is in your district technically, so I'm just curious, any thoughts on this whole subject?
On the rate increase,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, obviously it stinks, but I don't think that there's much that can be done. It's a failing system.
did you, when Representative Timmons came to do the tour, I emailed him about this and didn't hear back. Did you mention this to him, or is there any grant funding that he knows about to help with systems like this?
So I mentioned it to him, and Kurt actually took him out to Grandview to look at
Oh,
it and kind of walked him through, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And, as a non-utility person, he's gonna look at the buildings and not the manifolds.
Mhm.
But Kurt, I think, did a really good job of pointing all that out to me. And I haven't circled back with him,
Okay,
but I should do that.
okay.
and I'll bring something up in my commissioner reports, a little bit related to Ferndale and Grandview.
Thanks,
But this
Matt.
is a horrific number. And I'm joking in what I'm saying next. I almost wonder if we should spend $2,000 on lottery tickets as a way to solve the problem. That was a joke. But it's so bad. I mean, I could see a business leaving over this, another business leaving over this. And so, like, when does an organization recognize that they have something that's fundamentally structurally, we do recognize that, problematic, but it could just make the problem worse. What I'm trying to get at is this kind of increase could actually make the problem worse. I mean, I don't know if we did an exit interview, or if they would entertain an exit interview, but I want to know how much a Healthy Pets choice is related to infrastructure and utility costs. I don't know.
Mm.
Business environment. And this is their least efficient plan. It's one of their oldest ones.
That's where they started. Yeah. Yeah, I remember going out there many years ago. Yeah. In a different capacity. Yeah, so, okay. But this could certainly, I'm not running a business. I know that this kind of a cost impact could be devastating, depending on the nature of your business.
So part of what goes into the Grandview rates right now is repaying the bonds that we use to buy the system. And there's a gap in what we're gonna be collecting through the local utility district and what has to be paid monthly or annually. So there's gonna be a while where you're gonna have an increase in rates to cover that gap, and then the bonds themselves retire. And that's when, you know, and Annette and I have talked about this, that's when you start having a little bit of headroom to get in there and rationalize the system and, you know, rebuild it piece by piece.
Okay.
We're just not there yet, and it's, I just can say with 2020 hindsight, we never should have bought this.
Yeah, in my letter to Santa this year, Grandview will absolutely be mentioned.
Yeah.
So,
It just, I mean, every time I talk to Annette, it's what are we gonna do to help Grandview? And so far, you know, and Tom Anderson and Steve Jill, my predecessors, they all wrestled with this too. It is a real problem.
But just to be double, if we hadn't bought it, then maybe the city of Ferndale would, I mean, someone would be wrestling with
Well,
how to upgrade this.
If we
infrastructure.
hadn't bought it and they had declared bankruptcy and done what they should have done,
Right.
the county would have been on the hook. And I'm not sure that's a good outcome.
Yeah.
They don't have the capacity today. I'm absolutely certain they didn't 30 years ago.
Right, I guess that's my point, is that it's just a bad situation.
It is, a
Yeah.
little- well, and what we should have done was we should have had them pay us to take the system up front. And that would have allowed us to do some reconstruction, but nobody took that kind of asset management view of it coming in the door. And that's kind of what.
and I mean, it is an important lesson that when you build infrastructure, you should build infrastructure from an infrastructure organizational culture. And that's the message. You shouldn't have people who don't think long-term when they build infrastructure.
Well, and I don't want to, you know, when the decision was made 30 years ago, there was enormous pressure on the commission. There was,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it was they made a decision that was an okay decision at the time, that in hindsight, we say was not a great decision.
Mhm.
If you look at the early records and some of the documents on that, people, there's a real strong expectation that everybody parties to the table, the city couldn't expand.
Interesting.
Yeah, we were only gonna actually manage the thing for a couple of years and then it was gonna be theirs, but that never happened.
Thanks, Annette, for entertaining my question
And the discussion.
and the discussion.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll end on a happy note. Here is the electric rates.
Oh, good.
They're going up just a little bit, and actually the COSA shows that the majority of that's going to be to the industrial water system, not to our electric customers. The pass-through charges are going up, and that's due to a credit kind of discontinuing in in October of this year. It starts because they have the off year. But as far as the general services, which is the part we get to reimburse us for our costs, that's going up very small.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize that, but that increase is percent, I mean, because that discount, bottomless rates are increasing. They're flat. Yeah, but it's just that we're getting a discount. Secondary. Didn't we get notice that they're gonna have a similar discount but much smaller for next year? Get about that discount again in January next year. Maybe about half. Discount. Passing that.
All right, so if we want to move on to,
Oh, I don't know who was just speaking or what they were saying.
Oh, that was Brian.
Sorry.
Brian, you need to go to that microphone. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, he was just saying that the pass-through is gonna start again in January, and it's gonna be about half of what this year's was. And so that's why it looks like a large rate increase. It's actually not. It's no rate increase. It's just a big discount coming off and a small discount going on.
Okay, thanks.
all right, and so our pretty graphs kind of represent what we're talking about. The two things I really wanted to point out is to keep in mind that the scales on each of these graphs are vastly different. So the grand view, you know, we're in hundreds of thousands, the other ones were in millions. So keep that in mind. And then the big blue mountain and the industrial water, that's the cash if we issue that $70 million in bond, we'll have a big influx of cash that quickly goes away. So stay tuned for if we do that and if it will be that much, all of that kind of stuff. Any questions on that one? Okay, and just to finish up at our next commission meeting, then we will have the resolutions that will pass this budget as we've presented here for that. All right. That concludes the Dog and Pony Show.
And now we do a public hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Open a public hearing on the.
So I think the next thing is for us to open a public hearing on the proposed draft 2024 budget. So I'll go ahead and open that public hearing now. Are there any comments?
Let's get the mic up.
Yeah, thank you, John.
And then dive in.
Robin Dexter, Bellingham. I actually woke up this morning
Good.
having no intention, just no intention to testify today. But after listening to the Grandview discussion and being goaded, I've been around and around with Annette about this too. Your reserves are not big enough. You, as an entity, are in my way of thinking, the most your finances look farther into the future than anyone else. You guys are the last long-term thinking in local government, just because of the nature of utilities. And you've never used your taxing authority. The reserves have always been based on customer input more than anything else. And I think you should give some serious consideration, and I know this is a violation of normal accounting principles, as Annette has always told me, but we are in uncharted territory here in this world. And tax-supported entities like cities and counties are stressed to the max, and we're eventually going to come up against climate impacts that we didn't expect. And I think that the commissioners here should give serious consideration to much larger reserves, even if you have to use your taxing authority. And Rick is going to stand up after me and say that governments just can't keep their hands off surpluses. But I think it's time to revisit that idea. So that's my testimony.
Thank you.
Your turn.
Reiterating, of course, that we were goaded, but anyway. Oh, Rick Miracle, Bellingham. I would just restate my ongoing position on reserves. And that is that the main thing is that they need to be specified as to what they are for. You should not collect reserves just to build up a big slush fund. They need to be specified as this. These are the things that we are reserving money for. And the other thing is that they need to recognize that a lot of the things that you are reserving for involve purchases of equipment with very long lead times. And as such, you need to decide whether or not you want to reserve for that or use short-term or bonding financing to cover those expenses, since the lead times for the equipment can be certainly months and often years, things like transformers. So those are my comments on the reserves.
Would you guys invite a management opinion on? Okay, so I think that both of our customers that have spoken here are correct. When you look at the excuse me. When you look at the recommendations made by the American Public Power Association, APPA, and the American Water Works Association, AWWA, and we're members to both, they recommend, well, APPA recommends 6 months of operating reserves. And that would be to cover everything, including power purchase. And so you're looking, their recommendation would be that our reserves would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 million for the electric side. And specifically what they cite is experience in the Gulf Coast. When a major hurricane goes through and you've got public power down there, they're wiped out. They have to rebuild the system with no cash coming in at all for months because the customers aren't there. The homes are wiped out. Saw the same thing when I was working in Kentucky. We had a number of, Princeton was one of the towns that got hit by that horrible long track tornado that went through. And it ripped out downtown Princeton, 4,000 customers for that utility. Their downtown was gone. They had no employment left. They had hundreds of homes destroyed. Yet they had reserves and they went in and rebuilt everything. The American Water Works Association has about a 3 to 4 month reserve. So for them, for us, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 3.5 million. So the total reserves would be somewhere around $9 million to achieve kind of the gold standard. Those would be held for emergency capital and O&M. And that's, Rick, to your point, that is what they're earmarked for, not, let's go ahead and do a study or, let's start the geothermal project. Not that. It would be, when you actually have some impact on your existing system, how do you deal with it? The other thing I will say is that the whole thing about the short-term financing or even medium-term financing for long lead time goods, the problem that I've seen in public power is simply that when you want to make that short-term borrowing, so does everyone else. Because whatever it is, hit everybody. Think of a Cascadia event. And so, yeah, that's nice. And in normal operating conditions, that's true. And if whatever the emergency is only hits your utility, you're probably okay. But if those assumptions aren't correct, everybody else will want the same thing you're after, and the banks won't have it to lend. So it's kind of there's a real reason to have operating reserves at a significant level. So all that being said, my job is to balance out my recommendation for reserves with impacts on rates. And the issue there is, when rates are going up sharply, you really don't want to be raising rates more in order to build significant reserves. It's a dilemma. I don't have an answer for you.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Could you just comment a little bit so these situations, and Robin, you mentioned, just increasing climate impacts and you were sharing some examples from Kentucky, but can you talk a little bit about our insurance versus reserves? Is the reason, because I'm assuming our insurance will eventually cover many of those things, but is it just a timing issue? Is that the main?
Well, part of it's cash flow, part of it's deductible.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then part of it's actual coverage. You don't cover 100%
Right.
of everything that you've got.
Right.
But yeah, if we had a Cascadia event and ruptured 24-inch pipe everywhere,
Yeah.
that would be, we would probably start the contracting based on reserves and we'd apply for the insurance, and it would be, however long that would be, 6 to 9 months to get
Right.
it. So we'd have to float that gap.
Got it. Okay.
And that,
You mind?
Sure, you can go
Oh.
again.
That never even occurred to me, but since Commissioner Grant brought up insurance, it's been brought to my attention that homeowners are losing their insurance already on Chuckanut in anticipation of fires. The extension agency has a fire specialist now who come and inspect your home, and I had an inspection. She gave us a 22-page set of observations and recommendations, and I'm spending significant amounts of money to fireproof my home because I live right next to Lake Padden Park. So the issue of insurance is something to anticipate reserves for as well. You guys described my concerns fairly well, but they are also just, as I said, predicated on the idea that the stress on all other governments is going to exceed, what, because of your long-term planning and the reserves you have, you've never, the way this place has operated, it's never used tax revenue. And I think a very modest tax would be a good way to begin to accumulate reserves that, and they're not without purpose. Rick is going to say they're without purpose, but they're not, because there are just long-term impacts that we can't even anticipate now. And I only, and one of the reasons I come to this meeting instead of city council is because you have the ability to think long-term, and you have to be in the habit of thinking long-term. So insurance is another issue that's coming at us.
So, and just to let everybody know, we're a member of a public insurance cooperative called PERMS. And one of the big issues that they've been taking on the last 2 years is fire insurance. And our insurance premiums are going up. My concern is not, because we're in a very low fire risk area and our facilities are not like, a distribution facility.
Chelan.
Yeah, like Chelan. I didn't want to name names, but like them. Or Grant, or any of them. Okanagan. Yeah, Okanagan got burnt to the ground. But anyway, the issue that I have with our insurance pool is that right now, our premiums are going up to cover it, and we're in a very low exposure area. When something bad happens, assuming that it will, the insurance pool ends up paying for whatever that outcome is. And to the extent that they do that, everybody's rates are going to go up. So yeah, I'm very, very familiar with that. We do plan for it. Whether or not we plan well, yeah, and that's in hindsight. That's when you figure that out, unfortunately.
Oh, there's something in the Q&A.
Oh, there is. Okay. Can you, hey, Mike, can you take a look at what's in the Q&A and let us know what's there? There we go.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, that sounds right, but Annette, was that correct?
Oh,
It
I'm
amounts
sorry,
on average.
there we go.
$100 increase per business per month for Grandview.
There
Yes, we can.
is. So the question, because I couldn't see it on my screen, I had to pull it up myself, is if the 30% increase in Grandview equates to less than $100 increase per month per business. And then comparing that to rent increases in Bellingham or projected sewer increases over the next 10 years. And the point being is that the big percentage increase in Grandview is potentially less significant in real dollars than many other increases that are going out there. So the one thing, and we've kind of touched on this before, is Grandview is made up of some very wide customers. So we have customers, I'm trying to pull up my actual numbers here. So we have customers that are having a bill of, over $1,000 a month and $1,500. Oh, we got, somebody close to 2,000 during the summer a month. And then we have customers that their total bill is $200 a month. Mm-hmm. So it depends. So 30% increase on the 234 is, you know, $70. But when you have, so let's just take a month. Let's take October.
Yeah. And that the issue that you're getting is that the average, there is no real average customer out there. So just
Right.
smearing the dollars over all the accounts, doesn't really reflect the impact.
Right.
So
And this,
that number may be correct, but it's just an average.
right. So it's,
Yeah.
no, it's, here we go. I'm trying to get a good average here. So the average here is, you know, $170 a month. So, you know, that's $50 a month increase at just a flat 30. Take into account some of those are weighted heavier because we are following a COSA recommendation, not an across the board. So it's not 30% across the board for each of the individual billed items. It's 30% as aggregate increase. So some of those some of those people will see more than the 30% increase and some will see less. So yeah, you're right in that a 30% increase might not be big dollars to a lot of these places, but overall it could hurt some of these really little guys.
It also underscores that costs are increasing
Everywhere.
everywhere.
They're
and
increasing
in
everywhere.
every forum. Be it
Yeah.
sewage, milk,
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
property tax.
And it's also, I mean, Bellingham is about.
I wasn't aware of
grapple
that.
with Huge rate increases from the water utility, so it's gonna be top of mind, kind of county wide.
Okay,
Should we keep moving? I have.
so we have
11.
a public hearing that I have to close.
Yeah.
We were in the middle of, so if there's no further comment, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. I don't see any hands raised either online. Okay, so close the public hearing for the proposed draft 2024 budget. So let's move on with the agenda. We have a resolution to approve number 838, declaring surplus of certain district property.
And Brian, is that one you?
Oh.
Advance got it.
It's just our, about once a year, we have certain equipment and items we don't use anymore that are obsolete or broken.
Okay.
And we have to officially declare them surplus. So that's what today is.
And they're not, PUD, I'll just say, operates in a very unique statute. That if they're not obsolete to your function to sell assets, you have to go to a vote. of the people. So the assets have to be determined by you to be surplus or obsolete. To be able to just sell them or discard them. It was a
5
public,
disc CD player is not essential.
yes, yes.
How about the staplers?
Or a broken wrench.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm gonna make a motion to approve resolution number 838.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
I,
the next item is just to calendar and get notice our second meeting in December. And the idea behind this meeting is that we do have some financial things we got to take care of. So we can keep writing checks and get bills paid and all that. We expect this to be a Zoom only meeting, and
Okay.
that the only item that'll be on the agenda will be the approval of checks and vouchers claims,
And maybe singing jingle bells or something like that.
perhaps.
Okay. Okay.
We gotta find someone who can carry a tune, and that's not
so-
me.
So, do we need to make a motion to second meeting being December 19th?
I think so.
Yes.
okay, I'll make a motion for our second meeting of December to be moved to December 19th, which will be a Zoom teleconference only meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
I,
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners.
And then let's move on to the operations report.
Good morning. Before I get into my comments on operations, I just wanted you to note that thanks to technology, I can now be in 2 places at once. I'm here before you today and I'm listening online. So
wow,
just so you know. Okay, rather than the normal operations report, Chris has asked me to talk about the Climate Commitment Act. And I think this was in response to comments that Commissioner Desmonte had based on a recent presentation at a WPUDA meeting by a Department of Ecology representative discussing the benefits of participation in the Climate Commitment Act and, encouraging utilities to sign up. So I wanted to basically three things today, just give you a little background. And then one sort of talk about a little bit about the benefits that might come from our participation and also some of the downside, the costs.
Okay.
And I'll try to be as brief as I can and not get too far in the weeds because it's easy to do with this particular legislation. The Climate Commitment Act, basically, that it was passed by the legislature, was implemented this year. So this is sort of the first operational year. And in fact, the core function or the core element of that act is a cap and investment program that's basically involving emissions allowances, trading them, selling them, hoarding them. And the state has now gone through 3 auctions this year. So they're well underway with that program. We're not participating at this point. In fact, given our size and given our carbon footprint, we don't participate in CETA. We're not required to be part of the CETA program and submit annual documentation under CETA because we only have one retail customer. And under the legislation that was passed for CETA, if you've got one or fewer customers, you don't have to be involved. With the CCA, the Carbon Commitment Act program, there are thresholds above or below which you don't have to participate. And so every entity in the state, whether they're electric utility or an carbon emitting industry, if they basically generate 25,000 or more tons of CO2 or CO2 equivalent emissions a year, it's mandatory. They sign up, in this case with the Department of Ecology, and participate in that program. They also have to participate in the cap and investment trading floor, if you will, that the state has set up. If you're at or above 10,000 metric tons of carbon a year emissions, you need to report. You need to report your emissions. You also have to do reporting on what you're doing to cut down on emissions, but it's not mandatory that you participate in the full program. It's just a reporting function for 10,000 and over. For us, our carbon exposure sits, in our Bonneville power supply. It's with that portion that's unspecified source. And really what that unspecified source is energy that we purchase, basically Bonneville provides. It's mainly balancing energy. It's real-time, short-term purchases when Bonneville's needs to match up what our actual loads are to what our forecast loads were. And so it's a lot of short-term stuff over the course of a year that is difficult because of market purchases. Bonneville will use its surplus hydro, whatever it has at the time to balance our actuals to forecast. And so I look back at the 2021 data, and this is something you can all do online. We have to file. The only thing we have to file with the state is our resource mix for each year. And then that becomes published. You can go online and see the power supply portfolio, the mix of resources making up portfolio for every utility in the state of Washington. And it's quite informative. And you look at the different mixes. But for us, for 2021, our total carbon emissions were about 4,600 metric tons. So we're way under even the 10,000 metric ton threshold. We're not required at that point to do anything. To give you a comparison and to the wide range, I looked at our friend PSE. And I looked just at the unspecified portion of their portfolio, not the coal. But for the unspecified, in 2021, PSE emitted 887,000 metric tons of CO2, which was 9% of their portfolio. PUD, 132,000 metric tons. And that was about 4.4% of their portfolio. A mid-sized PUD, Benton County PUD, 32,000, almost 33,000 metric tons. So all three of them, it's mandatory they participate. And they're well above the 25,000 metric ton threshold. If we were to, now, within the legislation, it allows for an opt-in. You can participate. And there's two requirements that if you do, one is you have to be participating in CETA. So we would have to basically register, in this case, with the Department of Commerce, which manages CETA, to participate in the CETA program. We'd also have to register with the Department of Ecology to participate in CCA. And we have to sign up to use the trading floor, if you will, the emissions trading floor that the state set up. So that's a precursor. We have to do that if we're going to participate. Benefits. The obvious benefits is that because we're an electric utility, we get certain amount of free emissions allowances that we can then bank for future use. We can sell, or we can actually transfer to another entity. For example, we could get emissions allowances and transfer them to Phillips 66. There's three avenues by which you get free allowances. One is if you're electric utility and we're serving what they call an energy intensive trade exposed industry. Big mouthful there, but essentially Phillips 66 falls into that category. And because we serve them, our emissions profile, basically we could get free allowances to cover that 4,600 metric tons. And then we could basically, through the trading floor, we have to do everything through the state's trading floor. We could transfer those to Phillips. We could sell them. And if we sell the emissions allowances, the money that we collect has to be invested in our system and has to be demonstratable. It has to be a direct tie to reduction in emissions. So it's emissions mitigation project. You can't use it for other uses. You can't say, for example, we couldn't collect money and use it for emissions reductions in the city of Bellingham. It has to be within our system.
It can be used for new renewable energy production.
It can be used for new renewable energy production, correct. But here again, it has to have a benefit tying back. And that's one of the rubs for us. So address that. Our whole emissions footprint is in that unspecified. We could invest in renewables. There's no direct tie between how much reduction in emissions there is and the emissions produced by those, because they're real-time uses of energy. Just buying renewables won't necessarily offset. It might offset some, but it won't be a one-to-one. So, we don't get the full benefit because of where our carbon exposure lies. I don't know if that makes sense.
So it seems like the business decision is that on the one side there's revenue and the other side there's cost. The cost is staffing, staff hours that are necessary to
not
do the
entirely.
compliance.
I would
And then
say,
let me just finish my point. And then on the other side, on the revenue side is what is the allowances that we'll get from ecology? there's ambiguity to the allowances we'll get from ecology. And there's still ambiguity on the costs, for staffing. So maybe we can clear those up a little bit, over the next few weeks. And then once we know what those two are, then we can see that, okay, there's enough revenue to support that additional cost.
Well, the stated policy that's behind the law is that those emissions credits are going to decline over time and eventually go to zero. So if you enter into it now and you're counting on that revenue stream, you're not going to keep the revenue stream, but you're going to keep the payments. So it's one of those things where even if you're break even today, you're likely not break even next year, the year after, the year after. It's not going to be a long-term winner. It's going to be a long-term loser.
Well, yeah, but I mean, look, so let's just look at it that way, that, if that's also can be looked at, is maybe it's beneficial to quantify what that curve is, and if there's a significant enough win now that, and we know what our plans are, we're never going, so let's just say we've got projects that, we're exploring that will force us to be.
But once you're registered, you're
registered.
registered forever. You can't deregister because it's no longer economic. You're done.
know,
You're in and done.
And I think that's a very important consideration, very important point. Something that is certainly a permanent commitment to be registered, which is, I understand that's the way it does work, could potentially become
A large liability.
liability. to us.
Because if we increase our load a lot,
Mhm.
like if we get a new Cherry Point customer.
Well-
And then, or
But I mean,
whatever, yeah.
we'd probably trip into needing to register for CETA anyway if we grow our customer
Right, that's
base.
a good point.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I mean, we may have to go there, but today we don't have to, and there's not a big benefit for doing it. The problem is gonna be if we go in now and then the legislation changes and the credits. Because I guess the other thing
I
is,
may have misheard this, but one of the things that came up in the question and answer with the Department of Ecology is that they're willing for people who register later to let them get the benefit of accrued prior credits. So this could be something that we want to get in a letter. And the reason we might want to get that in a letter, because let's just say we bring on a second electric customer. Well, there could be a lot of money, which would force us into CETA.
Hmm.
And quite likely could force us into, you know what I'm saying? Yeah,
I do.
yeah.
I'm smiling because Ecology made a similar promise to water customers if they would only register their exempt wells back in the 1980s. And
Well, it's a different world today.
yeah, okay.
Jeff, since I'm at least, I have a hard, well, yeah, I need to leave at around 11. I think this is really interesting. Do you think that as Commissioner Deshmani suggested, we could continue this conversation, but maybe, and I know that there's probably some ballpark numbers around here, but just to understand what those free, if we
Yeah.
get those free allowances and we sell them to P66, what number are we even talking
Yeah.
about here? And
Let us quantify it
what
and
kind
we'll
of
bring it back.
projects?
Please, yeah, please do
Is
so.
this something that could help with a potential geothermal project? Is this something that we could only do with our existing, those would be helpful so that I can actually have a informed.
All compliance is annoying. I can testify to that, having done it myself. In carbon and things like that. It's always annoying, but it's quite often worth. Yeah, there's a lot of money on the table here in terms of allowances, potential, and I don't know how much that is.
Well, and remember the purpose behind this was to get those organizations that are mostly carbon to mostly not carbon. And we're caught up in it because we are mostly not carbon to begin with.
Which is why we get all the free money.
Well, I don't think there's all that much money on the table because
Okay, well, we'll see.
such
We'll
a tiny
see.
thing, but
There was for me. I remember this well. They paid a lot of paychecks. Let me tell you.
right, we will bring that back to you. Brian, do you have anything else?
No, I was just, one of the things to consider is there's a certain amount of turning over of local control. You now have two
Mhm.
regulatory
Excellent point.
bodies, Department of Ecology and Department of Commerce in your business.
But they're delightful to work with, so.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
At least we're not in the UTC's grip.
Mhm.
so.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to the commissioner reports.
I can go first. So as we talked about, Chris and I did a presentation to Climate Impacts Advisory Committee last week or the week before. I don't know, all
I
the
can't
weeks are
remember, yeah.
merging. But if we can get a recording of that, I can shoot that around. It might be something that's worthwhile to share too, if you hear from folks and they have questions about what we're doing. And then we are also on December 5th, Chris and I are meeting with the Whatcom Democrats Issues and Advocacy Committee. They're interested in learning more about the project. So we are just gonna basically be giving that slide deck again and answering questions. And so I think a lot of this at this point is just education. And so that's kind of the key thing that I'll be working on before then. And then, as we talked about before, I'll be reaching out to Northwest Indian College too, to just begin forming a relationship with them. Commissioner Arnett, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I attended the WAPUDA meetings the week before last. We had a great board meeting, approved the WAPUDA budget, but also it was sort of the passing of the torch from George Kahn to Liz Anderson, and wonderful to hear about all the work that George had done over the course of his time at WAPUDA. I'm on the government relations committee. And I wondered if we ever participated in Day on the Hill and if that's something that we want to do. They have tabling events and,
We have,
coffee service, and we've not, last year we didn't participate. It's February 14th. So maybe we can talk about how we
I'm definitely going down there for those.
I was there last year for that.
Yeah, I was there last year
was-
also, but I don't know that any of us did any of the coffee service stuff or did any of the
I did
tasting
coffee
event.
I did,
service.
yeah.
So
You did?
Zephyr.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He was strapped to my back delivering coffee to people.
Nice.
It's really fun. We should do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So do we have tabling materials for
we don't have to table. I mean, but it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to have a card on maybe geothermal or something like that.
Yeah, and we've
Yeah.
got those talking points, that 2-pager that you wrote up. It's
Yeah.
outstanding. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a real nice little document on here's what we're looking at and why.
I think if we all are down there for, I think if we
So
want.
we should come up with our,
Yeah.
kind of our asks.
Yeah. Oh,
Because there's
right.
specific asks on geothermal that we have of legislators, basically to include it in their bigger, like what was that thing, the study,
Automatic EIS.
thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
That's a good idea. So maybe at the beginning of January, we should talk about if we have any legislative priorities as a PUD. And if we want to have a little sheet that we hand out. And I would be excited to join for that again. The only issue with me is that Energy Northwest has a similar event that's like just a few days before that one, so I might not be going down to Olympia for both of them.
I'm definitely going down to Olympia for the WAPUDA meetings in February. And I'm definitely going to Portland after that.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing better to do on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, but there's a big Valentine's Tango Festival in Portland, so I'm definitely going to Portland after my meetings at WAPUDA. So.
And then the other thing is that, we're talking about having this board retreat, and we talked about this being like one aspect kind of the retreat where we focus on leadership and communication and that sort of thing. But we did talk about having sort of another maybe like a mini strategic planning session. Do you guys remember having that conversation? And I just thought of it because the education roundtable focused on transmission. And I feel like some of the language was like way over my head. It was great. And then we had done like a water 101 training session at the beginning of this last year. And I was, I'm just wondering if we can get something together like that for energy. So just some thoughts. Anyway, and I have a WIRA board meeting coming up. I'm not sure if it's the first or second week though. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's on my calendar as well, Jamie.
That's it for me.
I think that this issue of transmission in particular and kind of bringing it to talking about it in plain English could be really beneficial.
You're taking all the fun out of it.
Well, sorry, Fred, not all of us, but I think, Commissioner Arnett, you mentioned kind of hearing stuff from the community, and I think that there's a real lack of understanding in the community about this really significant challenges we're facing with transmission and how we can't just say like, oh, we'll just build wind in Montana and it'll serve us here in Whatcom County, no big deal, So I think some more education on that, however we can do it, is helpful. And we'll be talking about that with the Issues and Advocacy Committee a little bit too.
Yeah,
So
I was just thinking that's.
out of respect, I'll leave some time for the final. I'll be the briefest to that. Which may be a shock to my colleagues. So the main thing I want to do is get the approval from the commission on a meeting I'm doing December 14th with Rob Fix and the mayor and staff at the city of Ferndale to talk about, collaboration as it relates to Ferndale and thinking about Grandview and all of that kind of thing. I'm hopeful about that conversation.
Fix, it can be around telecom. Is that going to be the center point or?
No, water. And you're welcome to come to it too.
I'm just curious why Rob is there. Is he their economic development? What
Yeah,
interests he represents?
economic development, I think is what it, yeah. So, I'm excited about that. And, the, other thing is I attended Wapuda meetings. I have a lot of notes. So what I will do now, if Chris, if you can, help me with this, I will send an email to you and then you can forward out my Wapuda notes out to the commission. And transmission was absolutely discussed. If there's anything else. Oh, these are just current events that you guys should be aware of. When I send this out, I will put the exact dates and times, but apparently December 5th and 7th, there's some important presentations that are happening from Wapuda to key legislators. I may not have the exact dates right, to legislators. And Scott Richards, who's a telecom lobbyist, is participating in that. And it occurred to me that, again, we should try to make sure our state senators, since it seems like broadband policy will be more Senate-led in this next session, if anything gets led, certainly they can lean on the broadband office before, maybe both before or after the current head of the broadband office leaves, Mark Vasconi. One last thing that I think is worth mentioning to you is that the new scale project was canceled.
Yeah.
But some are happy about the potential of funds being returned to the federal government and those funds being redirected towards one of the Energy Northwest projects for a small modular reactor. So there could be a silver lining to that. And that you may or may not have heard this, but Energy Northwest at the executive board, which we're not on,
No.
Has had some conversations that they think will be that they'll have some very good news on their small modular reactor demonstration in the spring.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens there. That's all I have.
I have one thing on per diem requests really quick. you bringing up your pending per diem is appreciated, the right thing to do. It puts we're gonna bring back the per diem policy early in the new year. We may propose a form asking you to fill out what you see as upcoming.
Oh, it's good.
When per diems come in that haven't been discussed or brought up, because your policy, you'll recall, lists the pre-approved per diems and then ask that you disclose, like Commissioner Desmonte did, what you anticipate, and that those be approved. And our practice has been, if there's no objection, it's deemed approved. So when per diem requests come through that aren't expressed or aren't on the list, that put staff in the bind, may be incredibly legitimate for the benefit of the district, but then what does staff do in preparing the claims? Do they include it or not? Because it wasn't brought up. It wasn't on the pre-approved list. Intuitively, people can say, yeah, that seems right, but we try to create a policy that doesn't put staff in the position of being the gatekeeper of what's for the benefit of the district or not. Because that's an untenable position. So we're going to bring it back early in the new year policy to review, saying, is this working? Is it not working? Here's the problems that come up. It really puts the impetus on the commissioners to disclose now. So over the next 2 weeks or a month. And they'll also probably have a talk about a timing deadline of when you do submit per diems and after which you can't submit, because the delayed per diems become an administrative problem.
Okay. And then legislative session, by the way, the hot issues that are gonna come up, because the governor's a staff person came. And that meeting is gonna be hot. There's gonna be real intensity around that. We'll get to talk about that more. The climate capture act, there's a bill that's gonna be for revisions. That's gonna be a hot issue. And there's the decarbonizing the gas supply will be a hot issue too, just FYI. So for the new session.
So for my per diem, I am only requesting that December 5th issues and advocacy meeting.
Yeah.
Assuming there's no objection to that.
Nope.
Okay.
Okay, you've got to leave in 3 minutes, but
Public comment?
let's check in on public comment. Is there any public comment? Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, just a couple of comments around Snake River dams. The first is that if you have perfect habitat for salmon, but you don't allow any of them to come back into the streams, you will have no runs, even with perfect habitat. So part of this to keep in mind is that when you're looking at all these things, if we're going to have runs of salmon, we have to reduce or stop killing them for profit and sport. Secondly, it's clear from the discussions today and previous ones that breaching the Snake River dams will have an adverse effect on this PUD and indirectly its customers and the people of Whatcom County. And I would remind the commission that it is their duty to defend the interests of this PUD.
Thank you, Rick.
I'm good.
Any further comments? Great, well then, it's almost 11. We again remind everybody we canceled the executive session. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to close. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Jamie.
Bye, Jamie.
Bye.
See you in
Hope
December.
everybody feels better. Okay, all right.